Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we explore convenient yet effective shortcuts that will help you get ahead and move forward faster by becoming a better leader. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rembach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because I have somebody on the show today who can really give us some insight into accidents and why they should happen. Matt Beckwith grew up in Central Valley, California, cities of Fresno and Stockton. He and his identical twin brother were in the middle of the pack of 4 brothers and sisters, and a sister, all from his parents' other marriages. Matt's parents were both self-employed and taught all their children the value of hard work, but begged them not to go into business for themselves. Matt's mother was an employment consultant, and his father was a private substance abuse counselor, and they would share lessons about business, finance, and customer service. Matt was very young when his mother taught him the law of supply and demand and how a natural market could set the price for a product. Matt worked in restaurants early in his life and very much enjoyed the fast-paced, hectic world of full-service restaurants, but the restaurant life was not for him. He set out to start a career. Nearly 25 years ago, Matt was newly married and scored an interview with the local pencil factory. The babysitter arrived late, which caused Matt to arrive late to his appointment. They would not allow him to even interview. He sulked for a while before learning that the phone company was hiring directory assistance operators. Having always been fascinated with the history of the telephone, Matt jumped at the chance, and within a few weeks, he had started his new job as a 411 operator. Matt spent just 1 year as a 411 operator before moving on to other company opportunities. So he quickly learned to take training in supervisory roles. Matt has spent the years since then leading customer service and sales contact centers in various industries, from banking to healthcare to pest control. And he's currently the contact center director for Clark Pest Control, one of the largest and most successful pest control companies in the United States. Matt is a proud contact center geek and enjoys connecting with other contact center leaders all over the world. He is a 2018 ICMI feature contributor and call center demo speaker and panelist, and Frost & Sullivan Conference Advisory Board member and panelist. Matt also serves on the steering committee for the Northern California Contact Center Association and writes the blog contactcentergeek.com. Matt is an avid cyclist and part-time runner who recently completed his first marathon. He is also an active board member for the San Joaquin Bike Coalition. Matt and his lovely wife, Dawn, live in beautiful Stockton, California. Together, they're most proud of the job they did raising their 2 amazing daughters, Emily and Mackenzie. Mackenzie is a second-year business student at San Jose State University, and Emily and her husband, Garrett, have given Matt and Dawn the greatest gift they could have ever done. And that is 2 wonderful grandchildren, Avery and Maverick. Matt Beckwith, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
Yes, I am, Jim.
Matt, I'm glad you're here. Now, I've given my Legion a little bit about you, but can you tell us what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
Well, my passions tend to hover around a few things at any one time, but lately my mind's been set on my grandkids a lot, because my youngest grandkid turns 1 this very weekend, so we're very excited about that. And then in my day job life, super excited that our company's moving forward with focusing all of our efforts around true customer experience transformation. And that's a buzz term, but actually doing the hard work to look to see how the entire company impacts the customer. And that gets me up every morning and is on my brain when I go to bed every night.
Now, talking about that on the brain every night, you and I had the opportunity to chat prior to recording, and we started talking about how you and I, and probably many people, kind of have found the contact center as a career by default. And I would dare to say, too, when you start looking at the proliferation of the whole, contact center and customer-centric focus, for a lot of companies, that has been by default, but now they're being more intentional. And for us, as people who've been around for a long time, I think we kind of owe it to both ourselves and the industry to kind of make this a destination point, because things are getting so complex that we need an entire skill lift to occur, and that the contact center could be a lifelong career.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many of us, as you and I were talking about before, that as we go to industry events or we go to conferences and we speak to other people, so many people's stories are the same. They started off in industry A and somehow they ended up in this, and they look back after 20 years and they consider it an accident. And I wonder too, what's that going to look like for the next generation of leaders or the next generation of customers and employees if we don't do something to change the intentionality? If we start driving this as a career choice, truly as a career choice, around full cycle customer experience with all the exciting changes in technology, especially, we have to do more outreach as an industry, as leaders, to get people to want to do this. I'd love to go to college campuses and hear students say, I want to get into customer experience work. I want to work in a contact center, because there's a lifelong career ahead of that. And I think we could do a lot better, certainly for our future generations, if more people intentionally think of all the amazing things we've done by accidentally getting here. Wow, think of the power if we were intentionally getting here.
I think that's a great point. And I think, you and I kind of said there was a little bit of a difference from your path, because you kind of had this fascination of being an operator. But, for me, I think operator had a little bit different context, way back then. However, it did get you into being, someone who is actually leading an entire contact center operation for a lot of different industries. So tell us a little bit about how all of that took place. I kind of read a little bit in the bio, but how did you actually really get interested in being an operator?
Well, the funny thing is, my first call center job was a 411 operator, but my first experience with an operator, my mother, who believed in teaching my brothers and I, how to be fiscally sound, my twin brother and I got our first checking account, I think at 13 years old, a checking and a savings account. She was a co-signer. And when there was a problem with our account, or we had a question, we called the bank. And back then it's a bank that's become a big national bank. But I called the number that was on my statement that came in the mail. And and at that time, it went to the bank. But shortly after that, I called that same number and it went to something that I could tell was not the bank. And I learned about this, and they called themselves the operator, but they answered my questions. And I was fascinated because I was a teenager and I thought, they're on the phone all day. That's what I wanted. That was how I equated it. It wasn't customer first, it was customer second. But first they sit on the phone all day. And so here I was, a very young teenager. I might have been 13, and thought, there's a job where people are on the phone talking to people. That's the job that I want. And then that, was always on the back of my mind. Like I said, I wanted to go to work for a pencil factory. I often wonder what my life would be like if I went to work for that pencil factory. But I got that 411 job, and that started my career. And sometimes it is dumb luck that happened, but thankfully it did.
Now, for myself, there was a local 411 company. It was actually an outsourced 411 company that therefore sold their services back to the carriers. And one of the things that I always found interesting about that particular 411 center is it kind of was a training ground for all of the other contact centers in the area. So they would have people come in, and so for them, I think their turnover and tenure was really high. But for us, it was like a huge benefit because, I wasn't in that space. But, how did it differ from North Carolina, which is where I was, to California when you start looking at that type of business?
Well, first I would tell you the times must have been different, because I can tell you, as much as I'm a contact center geek today, I've always been a telephone company geek. So I've always studied the history around the telephone company and the telephone. But when I was in 411, the Public Utilities Commission didn't allow for outsourced 411. In fact, the very first national outsourced 411 was a company called Tell Me, which eventually became 800 and then 855 Tell Me. They were the first national one. But back when I did it, 25 years ago, there was only, in California, the Public Utility Commission only allowed Pacific Bell to do that. And how different was it? We were not a feeding ground. I was the first person hired in that building that was not related to a phone company employee in the history of that building. I also was part of the team that transitioned from massive paper books that had listings to computers. And when the phone company decided to go to computers, they didn't buy computers, they built computers. And because it's the bureaucratic red tape phone company, they didn't build QWERTY keyboards. They built keyboards that were 3 inches high, and the letters went A, B, C, D, E, F, G on the top row. They weren't a regular QWERTY keyboard. So I remember complaining that when I went home to my typewriter, it affected my ability to type. So there was zero innovation. And it was a couple of years after, and I continued to follow that industry for many years. But it was a couple of years after that there started to become a competitive landscape, certainly with the ubiquity of cell phones, and there was companies jumping in on that market. But when I was there, the only 411 was considered a public utility, and only the local telephone company was allowed to provide it.
Okay, that's really interesting, because now that starts resonating, because I think I remember reading a story about, this type of outsource versus, handled by the actual company, something that happened in Connecticut where it was the state legislation that actually instituted a new law that said you must provide it and you can't outsource it anymore. And that was a big buzz. And that was probably, 10 years ago or more. So I guess, the whole regulation by state can make things dramatically different on how that service was actually delivered. And I think it's a great, to me, that's one of the things I think you had talked about, connecting with other people within the industry. It's amazing to me to see how much we do have in common, but yet how much we do differ. And that when we come together, in that community and share these stories, much like, hey, by default, you came into the contact center somewhat. But, I was full default. I was retail. I actually had double majored in finance and real estate. I wanted to be an investment banker. Well, when I graduated in a recession, they weren't hiring people with my degree. And so, I needed to, like your parents taught you. I came from a blue collar family myself. My dad actually overhauled aircraft engines for small aviation, and my mother was a shop clerk, taking care of, invoices and fulfillment, requests and all those kind of things. And that's where I came from. So it was like, hey, you need to support yourself. And so I had to find a job, and I found a job working with a company in retail. And for them, they actually AutoZone and auto parts, that does well in a recession. So they were growing like crazy because people don't sell cars or buy cars. They work on cars during that time. And I, with that company, found my way into the contact center. And so it's kind of like, hey, that's how strange these things happen. But when we start looking at the commonalities and the differences, also you're seeing more and more of that being part of the association, right? So when you start talking about people seeing things and things differing, where do you see most organizations from their contact center perspective differing a lot more so than being similar or common?
Well, I think it's we could talk for a week on how everybody does it the same. But I think now everybody's trying to find, and certainly my involvement with our association is unique across most of the local associations across the country, in that nearly half of our members are public employees, so federal government or state of California government. We call them the alphabet soup because they all go by these three-letter acronyms. But they all, for us, because half our membership are public and half of them are private employers, we still see this this wide chasm of organizations that are trying to reinvent something, and we don't know. Maybe it's because we're in California and the mega centers are gone from California. They've been gone for many years, so you don't have 300, 400 seat centers anymore. But you have organizations that are trying to do interesting things as it relates to recruiting. We know the entire country's in a tight labor market. California, Northern California, is feeling that tenfold. So how companies are going around getting better candidates, how companies are retaining people, how pay is changing in California especially. And thankfully with our association, you see a lot of sharing. You don't see a lot of competitors in the same industry. So then that allows for tons of sharing. And you see public employee call centers, public institutions sharing best practices with private companies. And we're, I say the greatest area of innovation that we see amongst our members are around automation and AI and bots. It's the same stuff we hear across the country, but on a much smaller scale, because these might be smaller organizations or smaller departments.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point when you start talking about the whole labor aspects of where we are in this industry. And I think I don't think that's going to change, because even if we come into a scenario where we have more potential job candidates, I think we're going to run into, because of those bots and AI and things of that nature, that we're going to have a skill issue. It's finding people that are able to come into an environment that is more complex than it once was, because of all of those self-serve options doing what we need them to do, handle the simple stuff. However, when you start looking at the whole multi-channel aspects of a contact center now, where I'm handling, so many different types of interactions, is that, the entire door and windows are being opened to the organization. So people can contact us any way they want, anytime they want, and we have to be available to serve that. So again, it goes back to that skill lift. I think we're going to see more and more folks being able to handle multiple types of interactions that we're looking for to hire. Can you do 5 different things at one time?
Yeah, and Jim, that reminds me, there's a watermark for people like you and I that have been in this industry for a long time, and that watermark, or that tree ring, as I like to think of it, is when IVR self-service took off. And the reason that that's a watermark is we were all managing, if we were managing budgets, then we cared about average handle time more than anything. And that's how we staffed. And all of a sudden, we created this new whiz-bang technology. At the time when that happened, I worked for a credit card company, and we put together a pretty rudimentary IVR, but it played your account balance right away. Well, what did that do? That chipped away at your basic call that was going to be 40 seconds anyway. And that began the challenge that we still see today, which is that took away the easier tasks from all of your agents, which meant your average handle time went up, but your calls went down. And as your business grew, your calls went up to make up for that. And you still have this same budget where you were working on a 3-minute handle time, but that 3-minute handle time doesn't exist because those 40-second calls are gone. That happened in the early 90s, and it's happening again today, but it's happening today at a much different scale. And I think back then, the labor market, at least in California, was different, where what that meant was it made budgets tight. Today, it makes the labor market even tighter because of what you said. Then we have a skills gap. And that is, it's a, same verse, same song, same as the first, or what I said. We've been down this road before, but it's just magnified because of technology.
I really like the way that you actually explained that, and talking about the watermark thing, and that makes total sense. And when that happened, and I even see it even happening still today with other channels, is that for an organization, the whole aspect of visibility was a significant issue. So when it came to budget time, and I'm looking at the workload that we actually have to support in the contact center, if I didn't have visibility into all of the things that you were referring to there, and now all the visibility into the work that I have to do both on phone and off phone, and it all becomes part of my staffing model, I am going to be totally wrong size, and I'm not going to properly pitch the business need in order to be able to execute on that whole customer centricity thing, right? Because, okay, so now I have to do a better job of communicating across the entire organization. Well, how does that happen? It's not smoke. I mean, it has to be intentional. It has to be managed. Well, same thing with all these different, customer service channels. Who's going to manage that bot being a good bot? Otherwise, it's going to be like that first IVR that rolled out, and many that have rolled out since, is that if it's not designed well, it's not constantly managed, I mean, it's not going to do its job. So the work, I think, is shifting, but it's still an important thing when you start looking at visibility. Do organizations have visibility into all of these channels and all of their off-phone activity, so that they're doing a good job of being able to transform and be customer-centric?
Yeah, absolutely. It will be, I think, like with any technology, it just makes the challenges that we've had in the past bigger. It may not make them all go away. It just creates, I think, there's more scale today, and there's more at stake. And certainly in California, you talk to any leader, doesn't matter what industry you're in, it's about the tight labor market, and then that just makes it, like I said, 10 times harder.
Okay, so talking specifically about Clark, you mentioned the transformation that you guys are going through, and you said you're excited to see that. most often that doesn't happen with a flick of the switch. I mean, there's something that happens and then it's like, okay, we've made the decision. We're now going to be intentional. We're now going to move this forward. So when did you see, or could you tell, without giving any trade secrets, when that was going to happen and it was going to flip and it was going to start being intentional?
Well, I'll tell you, I totally agree with you. It's never a switch, and it wasn't for us either. It's been very intentional. I am insanely proud to work for the organization where I work. We are family owned and operated still. Mr. Clark, who found the business almost 70 years ago, very up until just a few months ago, came to work every single day. His two grown sons run the business, but he set the standard in 1950 with being one man with one truck servicing customers. We are the most customer-friendly organization I have ever worked for or seen in my entire life. And when it comes to now focusing on a true CX focus and true transformation, it's really now connecting all of the dots that want to be. So for us, we have leaders across the business that are eager to find out, how do we better fine-tune our voice of the customer? How do we go truly end-to-end and look at every single point along that journey? And so we've acknowledged it over the last couple of years that if we're going to continue to grow, we're going to focus on this and call it out specifically. But so much of the work, Jim, we have already been doing. And so we have an incredible foundation. I'm lucky because I'm involved in an organization that doesn't have there isn't a lot of low-hanging fruit, but that also makes it kind of challenging. But we have an amazing foundation. And for us, it was about just acknowledging to everybody that there's work to be done, that we could get even better than we are today if we look at it holistically, and every single thing that a customer goes through from the very beginning, from pre-acquisition to acquisition to service to even offboarding. And I think that's where we are today.
So one of the things when you start talking about, the legacy of the organization and being able to refer back to many of the things that you've always have done is, you start thinking about, okay, how are we getting creative and doing things new and not using some of that past history to drive some of our decisions? So in other words, hey, we take what was good and what got us here and we continue to amplify that. However, we know we need to pivot and shift so that we don't get disrupted. And so how are you bringing that into the business?
Well, for one, I consider myself a professional customer, more so than I consider myself a professional customer service leader, because I've been a professional customer since I was about 9 years old. I've always been that person when I'm not annoying, and my wife will sometimes look at me when I say something, or she'll know that I'll take a quick note about something. But I don't have to go to contact centers, and I don't have to go to pest control companies to learn about delivering amazing service. I can go to, there's experiences in hospitals, there's experience in schools, there's experience in restaurants, there's experience at the deli that's down the street from our corporate office that they treat us amazingly well. And they've taught me, that owner of that deli has taught me things about customer experience. And it's about taking those inputs from the outside and synthesizing them to say, what does that mean for our customer base? And socializing them amongst the rest of our leaders, getting some buy-in, and how does that translate into a project or something that we can try? I mean, one of the things I think customer service leaders do to a fault is we think about ourself as the customer. Think, how would I view this? Well, I think that's a trap, because I am literally one tiny, I'm not even a persona, I'm a fraction of a persona. I care about what happens to much wider swaths of customers. So going to like our local deli near the corporate office that has fed us very well and does lots of big catering jobs, they've done some things, and we think, how do we apply that? How do we apply what they've done? And so we talk about those things all the time. We don't say that we're chasing the standard of the best pest control company, because quite frankly, we believe we're one of them. But how do we chase USAA as it comes to technology, customer-facing technology? How do we match Chick-fil-A when it comes to service at the drive-thru? How do we match this deli when it comes to pricing options and things like that? And that's where I think we start learning and creating real innovation by looking outside of our business.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, too many times I see where organizations stay within their own four walls and try to ideate and do that, and it just it just doesn't work. You end up being a little bit better than you already are, and you can't afford that these days. Okay, so what we've been talking about here, when you start talking about career, when you start talking about finding right candidates, when you start talking about change and all that, it's just loaded with a whole lot of anxiety and emotion. And one of the things that we do on the show is we look at quotes to help us stay pointed in the right direction. Is there a quote or two that you like that you can share?
Oh, I've got two that rule my life. The first one by the great American writer Ralph Waldo Emerson: "Who you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear a word that you're saying." Jim, that's been my favorite quote my entire life, and I'm not exaggerating. I still get chills when I say it. That drives who I am as a leader. That drives who I am as a contact center professional. Who you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear a word that you're saying. Don't tell me who you are. Show me who you are. The second one that has been a lot of fun throughout my life is from the tennis great Martina Navratilova. The moment of victory is much too short to live for that and nothing else. Talk about journey. I mean, that's what that quote means, and I think about that all the time. Just because I won at something or we had a success, the journey matters just as much.
Well, thanks for sharing those. It's kind of really interesting that you said after your Emerson quote that it gave you a chill, because when you said it, it did it to me too. I wonder if any of our listeners the same thing happened, because that has so much depth to it. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. And matter of fact, when we get done here, that quote is going to go up on the wall for my kids to see. I appreciate that.
Nice.
So when we start talking about, that career path, when we start talking about, having kids, grandkids, all of that stuff, you mentioned that you're too young to have grandkids. And for me, I'm like, I think I'm on the opposite end of that. If I ever have grandkids that come, shoot, man, I hope I'm still being able to move around and interact with them. But, when we start talking about all of those paths that we end up, taking and where they take us, there's a lot of humps that we have to get over. Is there a time where you've gotten over the hump that you can share with us?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've managed contact centers for so many years but there's one moment where I almost took a detour and left, if not for the sage wisdom of one of my best bosses of all time. And, my story's not that dissimilar from anybody else that's done this line of work. I was managing a large contact center in the banking industry, and I just found myself bogged down by the things that I didn't sign up for. Managing, leaves of absence, law changes, or personnel issues, even though they weren't any more or less than any other contact center my size. It just felt like that had the lion's share of my mental space, rather than the exciting, innovative things that we wanted to do. And an opportunity came up for me to move into a completely different side of the business, supporting our operational accounting group. They wanted somebody that was not an accountant. They wanted somebody with operations experience that could translate some of the financial stuff back to the between operations and finance. And the business partner I had worked with for many years created this new position for me. And we had been talking to my manager at the time, and my manager said, I will support you 1,000% if you want to move into this role. But then he taught me, his name is John Green. He taught me what we now call the John Green lesson, or the John Green diaper rule, actually. He said, Matt, you love your children. My children were much younger than they are today. They were actually children, not adults. And he said, you always talk about your children. You love raising your kids. And he says, do you love every part of it? And I go, of course I love every part of it. My daughters are my life. He said, do you love those dirty diapers? And I said, no. Not particularly. He said, what about the middle of the night dirty diapers? I said, no, not particularly. He said, how does that change the overall love of your children? I said, not one iota. And then, as wise as he is, he just sat there and looked at me. And I got it instantly. Sometimes you got to change dirty diapers. And over that weekend, after we talked about it, I made the decision to not pursue that accounting role. And that was 13 years ago. And I look back now I still stay in contact with that former manager. In fact, all the group of his direct reports. He had a group of VPs that we've all stayed together, very close. We're called the Green Team, and we talk pretty regularly, get together when we can, and we always talk about that John Green diaper rule, amongst the other things we learned from him. And I think my career I would not be talking to you right now, Jim. I wouldn't have the fun that I've had. I wouldn't have met the people I've had. I wouldn't have made the impact that I've made if you put me in an office and put me on spreadsheets in an adding machine 13 years ago. And that I live that lesson every day. And I've had employees that are they're frustrated in a moment. And they want a big drastic change, and I support change, but I tell them about the John Green diaper rule.
Thanks for sharing that, Matt. That was an excellent story. And thanks to having more John Greens into our life that can help us, really provide some clarity. We definitely need that. So, okay, everybody, we're talking with Matt Beckwith of Clark Pest Control, and we're going to break for a little bit of a announcement from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back to do the Hump Day Hoedown.
An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, it's time to do the
Hump Day Hoedown.
Okay, Matt, the Hump Day Hoedown is a part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Matt Beckwith, are you ready to hoe down?
Heck yes.
All right, so here we go. What do you think is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Well, Jim, although it's less than it was yesterday and less than the day before that, it still is doubt and fear. And I tell myself every day, less than it was yesterday, but it's doubt and fear.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
It has always been and always will be about your people. Nothing matters before your people.
What is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
Something my mother and my father taught me: life is too much fun and too short to leave to chance. Plan it out. I plan my week, I plan my month, I plan my year, and I spend a lot of time after those reviewing what I just did to help me plan the next week, month, or year.
What do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. Nearly 15 years ago, I stumbled across Manager Tools, the free podcast to help you be a better leader. And still to this day, how I learned how to do coaching, one-on-one, and feedback, that helps me be a better leader every single day. And I still rely on Manager Tools every day of my life.
What would be one book that you'd recommend to our Legion? It can be from any genre.
Well, we've all read the same contact center books. We've all read the same customer service books, but I have been saying for many years, the single greatest book that every contact center leader should read is The Great Freakonomics by Leavitt and Dubner. That groundbreaking book is just a bunch of their case studies, but the reason it's their best book for contact center professionals is it helps you separate the difference between causal and correlation. And in our business, every time we make a change in one place, we think it caused a change in the other place. And you spend time reading Freakonomics and the follow-up books, you'll understand causality and correlation much better.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Matt Beckwith. Okay, Matt, this is my last Hump Day Hold On question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you have been given the chance to take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take everything back. You can only choose one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
Boy, this is your hardest question, isn't it? The only thing that I would take back is that skill to be able to let go. Live in the moment, let go. The things that you think are the biggest issues today, I promise you, in another week or month or year, you're not going to think that. Life is short. Let go and go home early every now and then.
Matt, it was an honor to spend time with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jim. I'm all over the place, but probably the best way is go to my blog. It's contactcentergeek.com. There's links to where you'll find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I spend more time on Twitter today at Matt Beckwith than anywhere else, but start at contactcentergeek.com. You'll see my thoughts on leading contact centers and also links to find everywhere else where I'm at online.
Matt Beckwith, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.